Welcome back to CKPG's Canada Day Special. The railway line running from Prince Rupert to Winnipeg was once known as the Grand Trunk Pacific Railway Line. Construction of the northern route began in 1905 to open new areas of the prairies. There were two ends of construction, one from Winnipeg and the other from Prince Rupert. Canadian history was made when the two met in Fort Fraser.
Many of us who drive along Highway 16 may not notice this road sign just outside the village of Fort Fraser. In this area, on April 7, 1914, the Grand Trunk Pacific last spike ceremony was held.
We had a race going between the East Side Railway, and the West Side coming together at one point. The East Side won, and the West Side got to lay the last set of rails, and then the spike was pounded in.
Building the Grand Trunk Pacific Railway through this section of North America was challenging. The difficult terrain, weather, and a shortage of workers was a recurring problem.
This particular section of the railway was the most difficult, took the most time, spent the most money to get it completed because of the terrain itself, because of the weather. Imagine coming through here at minus 30 degrees. Back then the weather was much different, much colder, much more snow, so it was way more difficult than what we would have thought.
Fort Fraser, situated on the Yellowhead Highway between Fraser Lake and Vanderhoof, has a history that goes back to some of the original European settlers. Railway history is most recognizable throughout the community.
Because we're not a big town anymore, I don't know if that really interests anybody. It's the history part. That's what they want to hear. And, railway.
Last year was the 100th anniversary when the last spike was driven. To celebrate, a group of railway buffs rode a passenger train to Fort Fraser.
Right on the day we did the celebration at the tracks with the train stopping, and
people all across Canada, from all across the United States and internationally as well, very passionate about trains, very passionate about that era, and it was a very different time at its peak. Yeah, lots of love for the trains, that's for sure.
The Grand Trunk Pacific was the second transcontinental railroad and became one of the factors in the development of central British Columbia. In 1923, the Grand Trunk merged with the Canadian National Railway. Without the hard work of the railway construction crews, northern BC would not be tied to Canada as it is today. Dave Branco, CKPG News.
Canada's history has been greatly shaped by its link to Great Britain. We continue to share cultural ties, legal traditions, and goodwill with our former colonial power. This next story shows how local people stepped up when the British Army was in need of something northern BC has plenty of.
And to this day, they still get Canadian black bear hides for their grenadier-style bearskins.
This hat has history. Its story links Prince George to Great Britain and, to an extent, one of the most decisive battles of all time.
It's Prince George's connection to the Napoleonic Wars.
It was created more than 60 years ago. In 1950, Hilliard Clare was the president of the Prince George Union Chamber of Commerce.
There was an article came out saying that the Grenadier Guards were at a loss to obtain bearskins because their supply from Russia had dried up or been terminated. So we just said, well, we'll fill that void for you, and we offered to get bearskins for them, which they accepted.
It was a story that graced the front page of the Prince George Citizen on December 14, 1950. It reads, "Bearskins from Prince George may soon be gracing the stately heads of His Majesty's crack regiment, the Grenadier Guards."
These are the people you see mounting guard in England for the Queen, the first and second foot guards, now the Grenadier Guards and the Coldstream Guards.
Starting in the spring of 1951, roughly 50 northern BC bearskins, like the one used to make this hat, were collected at Northern Hardware and sent to Britain.
We relied on hunters and people that had nuisance bears and whatnot, and they'd come in and dump them in the alley behind the store, which didn't please everybody. And we had First Nations women would skin them and clean them for us.
In return, the British Army sent a number of the bearskins back to Prince George as a gesture of thanks. Hilliard's son Sheldon still has this one. His knack for military history gives him an even greater appreciation for the story behind it.
It's an interesting story about how the Grenadier Guards, originally the 1st Foot Guards, started to wear these hats. And it's because they defeated Napoleon's Imperial Guard at Waterloo. And when the Guard recoiled, the 1st Foot Guards and the 2nd Foot Guards, the Coldstream Guards, they took this as a battle honor to have their name changed. And the 1st Foot Guards became the Grenadier Guards.
But Claire says historians looking at this closely believe it was actually a different Napoleonic unit that was pushed back. Distinctions aside, the Guards received a name change and a hat change. They replaced their chacos with bearskins.
Prince George has historical links to many interesting events in history. This particular link because of the bearskin and the work of the JCs in providing bearskins for the Grenadier Guards in the 1950s as an initiative of my dad is a cool thing. And they still to this day get Canadian harvested black bear to make these hats.
Next on CKPG's Canada Day Special, a feature on local lacrosse legends, including Fred Doig, who played lacrosse in 8 different decades.